My name's Fiona Browning. I've lived with mental health issues for 25, 30 years. The emergence of suicidal thoughts and behaviours came, it was postnatally, and I just had my second child. The emergence was very sudden, very severe, and it was something I didn't understand. There were quite a lot of incidences where the ideation became so terrifying that I felt my only way to get rid of that was to use medications. I have complex post-traumatic stress disorder from childhood trauma. There have been 2 times in my life where I have contemplated and intended to suicide. The second of those, I won't go into the details of how, but again, ironically, even though I'd had years and years and years of constantly having thoughts, it was a very sudden impetus that led to me suddenly decided that's it, it's time to do this. I was very lucky on that occasion that there was police attendants, ambulance were coming, and there were 2 things that really helped me at that point in time. Very specifically at the moment, the police officer said to me, you don't have to do this, and we can always find something else. There's always a way to hope and a way to get you through this. And those 2 things have never left me. So in those times in the future when there's been suicidal thoughts, that someone else can help me find hope, even if it's just for the next 20 seconds. If I can hang on to that and use that as my thread to keep moving. 25 years later, in the last 10 years, suicide has become not something to be feared, but sorts of suicide have become, for me, a benchmark, a yardstick to measure how well or unwell I am. So I realised when I start having suicidal thoughts, I know now I don't have to act on them, to try and not be afraid of their presence and to use them as a monitor. So if I'm starting to think, oh, okay, why did I just suddenly think, the world would be better off without me? And that, okay, well, what's going on in my life at the moment? Let's do some check-ins. I've developed this massive toolbox of things that I do to help me get through, and if I've been triggered, monitoring that kind of thing.
I'm Dave Peters. I have been living with, suicidal thoughts and feelings, as well as mental health kind of stuff, for most of my life. My first sort of earliest memory of feeling so intensely of that sort of thoughts of dying and death, that when I was about 8 years old. When I was 8, my parents told me that I was one half of an identical twin that died in utero with me. And so when I was 8, I hurt myself sort of with the intention of dying to be with my twin. Looking back now, I can see that was never going to be the result of my actions. That was my intent. I didn't formally sort of seek help, I guess, for mental health stuff until I'd lost all of those life roles that we consider important. So I'd lost a long-term relationship, and then I hurt myself at work and wasn't able to work anymore. I was about 27 when everything sort of started to come unravelled, because I didn't have those things that I considered sort of part of my identity. I've always found help seeking to be quite difficult, despite the amazing impact that the times where I have sought help has done. Which is quite paradoxical. You'd think with all that wonderful evidence that it's really helpful would reassure me and help me feel able and capable of reaching out when I need it. But no, I still struggle. I would say it's a key part of my everyday life. I'm always, not plagued, but I find myself thinking about dying and wanting everything just to stop quite a bit. And I find my days are really spent trying to find ways not to, and trying to find ways to distract myself from those thoughts and feelings. It's when things get a bit overwhelming or when they get very overwhelming, or when pain gets to be out of control, that I just want everything to stop. And that can be as temporary or permanent as I like, depending on the circumstances and how severe things are.
I'm Ingrid. I've actually lived with suicidal thoughts since I can remember. I was about 6, 7 years of age. And it's continued to most of my adulthood. There are times when it's intrusive, and it's in times of great struggle that they come on, and they leave quickly, they can linger. It really depends on what's going on around me. And yet that doesn't stop me also from at times really feeling energized and enthusiastic about life. On one hand, it wants to run away and I don't want to be here, and I think about how do I not be here, and yet I know that I actually don't want to go down the next step of doing anything for a variety of reasons. But unless I can keep that in a safe box and that I'm declining in my thinking, I'm still very ashamed of seeking help. I did go kicking and screaming to seek psychiatric help. And what helped me in my journey of recovery was that I had a fantastic relationship with my clinician. And that was key, that we connected, that we were able to find a page of commonality.
I've had a tendency to depression most of my life, from my childhood, especially in the teenage years and early adulthood. I experienced a very bad crisis around the year 2000 when the whole thing turned into major depression. There were several suicide attempts and eventually things got a lot better. However, it took a number of years before they got better. The impacts on my life were, at the time I was a mum with teenage children, going through a divorce and renovating a house. I fell apart as a person. I was no longer this wonderfully efficient person who could get things done and move things along and make decisions. I totally lost the ability to make decisions. I just lost the person I was, and I really felt like I turned into somebody else during those years. And then magically, after about 4 or 5 years, I was prescribed adequate, effective medication, and things changed within weeks. The barriers to my recovery were my own lack of knowledge about mental health issues. They were also my family's lack of understanding about mental health issues and their almost old-fashioned way of looking at things. And this mental health system at the time wasn't quite as good as it is now. So and I live out of Sydney, so there was one local incompetent psychiatrist and no one else to turn to. Whilst I was in that time, I lost the respect of lots of people in the community and my children, especially one of them, and that carries over until today. I certainly didn't get the support I needed. My family were very unsupportive. I was stuck, and it was only eventually when I went to a GP that I had my medication fine-tuned to work. But that was after 4 or 5 years.
I'm Kerry Gleeson. I work in the field of suicide prevention and recovery and postvention. And I have lived with suicidal thoughts and behaviours since I was 13 years old, a teenager, having an attempt at 13, quite a serious attempt, and was hospitalised due to childhood trauma, and then after having my second child, having suicidal ideation. The impact it's had on my life has actually turned around to be a positive experience after lots of ongoing therapy and journey of healing and reflection. And I now use my lived experience to save lives in my work. Initially, as a teenager, I didn't seek any help at all. And then as an older adult, I attempted to seek help on several occasions with GPs, and unfortunately was rejected by quite a few GPs that said that they were unable to do the GP mental health plan and didn't actually have the time to do the plan. So working in the field myself, I found that really a really frustrating, difficult journey, that I went to where I thought was the right place and I got, rejected on several occasions. So I did later on in my life persist and managed to get an appropriate GP mental health plan and managed to find an amazing psychologist. After going through a few psychologists and found one that I really connected with, that's what's given me the strength.
So my name's Caroline, and I've been living with suicidal thoughts and behaviours since 1996. So in the past, in those early years, I had a lot of very bad experiences where I tried to seek help after suicide attempts, and I had a lot of awful experiences with emergency services. In more recent years, I've become much more self-aware of the sorts of situations that are likely to trigger a suicidal crisis.
Yeah.
And a lot of the way I manage is to simply avoid those situations. And I guess I know that when I am in suicidal crisis, I know that the safest place for me to be is in my bed. So that's what I tend to do when I'm experiencing an overwhelming urge to suicide. I tend to bunker down in my bed and just ride out the wave of suicidal ideation there.
I would say my entire life. I remember being 6 or 7 and wanting to hurt myself, not really understanding what that feeling was, but wanting to hurt myself and not understanding why. So it's been an interesting journey that in my kind of early to mid 30s, I realised that I'd been suicidal. Suicide had been a companion for my entire life. It was a precipitating event in sort of 2011 that caused me to really decompensate quite badly. And it gave me an opportunity to reflect on the fact that I really lived with the idea of suicide my entire life. It's always been this almost backup plan. If things don't go well, I can always kill myself, or if that doesn't happen, well, I guess I can just kill myself. And it was some conversations that I had that really brought it home to me that other people don't think like that. It's been quite positive to recognise it and understand what it is, because it's now given me the opportunity to understand what I need to do to avoid that. It's provided me with opportunities to seek help, that I finally understood that there was something wrong. It's no picnic living with, mental health issues. It's, that I call it the itty bitty shitty committee in my head. Sometimes you wake up in the middle of the night and you kind of go, your head goes, oh, just so everything you're doing is crap and you're an idiot. You kind of go, oh, thanks for that. It's something that you live with every day and you learn to adapt and adjust. And I have a really good support network around me.
Thinking about seeking help as a teenager, I guess, was the first opportunity where I was independent enough to be sort of self-directed. I was afraid of seeking help, I guess. There was a lot of fear and stigma around the idea of mental health or mental illness. I was afraid of anyone finding out that I was crazy. I think I was most afraid of myself, of being told that there was something wrong with me. It really wasn't until sort of everything fell over after losing, a long-term relationship and not being able to work again that I desperately sought help. I saw how dangerous a situation and dangerous a place I was in. I was constantly thinking about how I was going to die and the way I was going to facilitate that. And I didn't know how to cope with that at all. Previously I'd had those thoughts and feelings intermittently, and they would pass, but this was like an extended, months and months of feeling like that all the time. I found going to emergency not a helpful place to be in when you're in suicidal distress. They ended up sort of piddling arguments about what catchment area I was in and what jurisdiction I was supposed to be in. It told me to leave and go to another hospital. Then the other hospital said, oh, no, you definitely should be in the right place the first time. So leave here and go back there. I felt constantly sort of hunted and unsafe. So it took, unfortunately, some time to get a referral to a psychiatrist and to actually get an appointment, despite being in that state. I saw a psychiatrist for several years, didn't really feel like that was helping. It wasn't until I was sort of giving almost a passing referral to a community mental health space that talked about the concept of pursuing a meaningful life with or without symptoms, that I started to, I guess, explore the idea that life could still be good, whether I was feeling horrible or not, and I could still have something that I was satisfied with, even if I didn't feel quote unquote happy. What's made the most difference in terms of help seeking, I think, is surprisingly being Lifeline. When I'm in a really unsafe space, wanting desperately to act on my feelings and just feeling like I can't I can't get respite. None of my usual sort of strategies of avoiding or distracting or medicating are working. Having someone on the phone who can listen, and even just through what now sometimes it's not even what they're saying, it's how they're saying it. It's the slow, measured, calm that grounds me and brings me back to a place where I'm able to manage again. And that I've found to be incredibly useful and successful.
My experience of help seeking is where the issues I deal with now are more to do with the trauma involved in seeking help than in the actual original issues. So I've had a lot of extremely negative experiences, particularly with the public mental health system. So lots of times where I was taken to the hospital after a suicide attempt, being told that I was attention seeking and manipulative and all those things. I've also had negative experiences of being locked in seclusion and tied to a bed and those sorts of things when very distressed, which has caused significant harm. So for me, help seeking has not been positive. It's been a very difficult thing, and my deepest hope would be that would change over time. Sadly, it's not changing fast enough. In terms of what makes a difference, like comparing my current psychologist with all those failed ones, my psychologist works very much from a trauma-informed perspective, a genuinely trauma-informed, not just the catchphrase. So my therapy sessions look very different to what they have looked like in other situations.
The idea of trauma-informed care and recovery-focused care has been something I've been grappling with since I was little, because I knew what I wanted and what my child at that time, my inner child, needed, but no one was giving it to me. And it's only now that I have a really strong feeling of what they mean to me. Trauma-informed care is about putting me into a cocoon when I'm in a crisis, having a comfy blanket to hold on to that keeps me warm, and having someone help to sit with my pain, that they help acknowledge, validate, and actually sit with it there with me, to actually not judge, to not say, no, you can't feel that way. It's actually okay to feel what you feel. And then with that blanket, give me a hug, walk alongside me to enable me to take those first baby steps, so that, like when I break a leg, I'm on crutches and my leg's in plaster, that one day through therapy and exercise, I'll be able to let you go, let the crutches go, and walk tall on my own.
Trauma-informed care and recovery to me means nurturing, non-judgmental, encouraging care with optimism to convey the message that the person will improve. When I went through my experience 20 years ago, I would have not had any idea. But now I'm able to look back on that time and reflect on what happened. There probably wasn't much trauma-informed or recovery-based care happening. However, since I've started doing this work, helped me to understand how it could have been, I suppose, and it could have been a lot better. Had it been positive, non-judgmental, and nurturing, I suppose, to encourage me to improve. Some positive attitudes that gave me the belief that I could improve, because for a long time I believed that this was it and this was the end of my life and it just couldn't get any better. The most important thing in my recovery was actually receiving some good medication. Yeah. And I felt that after that I had turned into something like the person I used to be before this terrible episode. But the care I received during those years left a lot to be desired. I would expect a lot more care and respect. There was a lack of empathy. There was a lack of relationship building with the people that I saw and who looked after me. And I would think it would not be as bad these days, because the population as a whole knows a lot more about mental health than they used to do, but the stigma is still there. I think that I would be a totally different person were I looking for support today. And because I've learned so much over the last 20 years, And the community has learned a lot in the last 20 years about mental health issues. Mental illness is now no longer has quite the stigma it used to, but it still has one.
A trauma-informed approach doesn't pathologise behaviours and experiences. So again, rather than labelling things as pathology, a trauma-informed approach takes the perspective that whatever the person's experiencing is a normal reaction to a highly abnormal situation. The person presumes that I'm doing the best I can with the resources that I have. And that comes back to a lot of those situations in other areas that are not trauma-informed, where you're labelled as manipulative and difficult and attention-seeking, whereas a trauma-informed service will approach me as a genuine belief that no matter how chaotic I may present as, that I'm genuinely doing the best I can with what I've got.
I think when you've had a long-term life with mental health issues, it does become a bit of a mixed bag. I actually find it quite ironic that my first experience was an extremely positive one, in that, I just had a baby, there was a lot of postnatal stuff going on. I was, severely and very suddenly unwell. So when the emergence of suicidality came into it, it was looked at very seriously, very sympathetically and empathetically. So the lens that it came through was, okay, let's figure out what's going on here. What can we do? The whole sort of treatment focus was put into place. So it was just quite medicalised, but still very respectful. I had private health insurance at the time, so I had instant bed access. It was a unit that supported parents and infants together. So everything was really tailored to meeting, the complex mix of needs. And that support stayed in place for like 2 to 3 years. So whenever, even though when you get out of hospital, if the suicide stuff emerged, I could ring the hospital and speak to the nurses, or there was just this wonderful community of support. Quite a few years later, when I didn't have private health insurance anymore, I'd been disconnected from those services. When it emerged again, it was a real shock, and it literally to be treated like an issue, not a mental health issue. The whole shock of what it is to be an attention seeker, and that the response to that was not just paternal. It was downright, the classic, you've just almost completed suicide. We're sending you home even though you say you're not safe, because you've had 24 hours more in the ward than you should have had. So when I needed acute care, I just couldn't access it. The most important perspective of this in my recovery is the individual. That everybody, even though everybody experiences these things differently, we all experience distress, and that I would like people to approach me with that in mind. I'm not a diagnosis. I'm a human being. It's very basic stuff, but that's the most important thing. Get to know me, who I am as a person, what makes me tick, before you start deciding, what you're going to do to help me in that whole model of it being a mental diagnosis versus a behavioural diagnosis. Forget the labels. It's not about a label. It's about me having an experience at the moment, and what can we do to help me get through that experience. And so things like safe spaces, having an advanced care plan, all those sorts of things now are the things that make a difference too. I think if I did get severely suicidal again, I've got so much more that I won't be as frightened about connecting back with the mental health system.
The recovery part, the best way to describe it for me was the ability to start having some hope that there was a road out of the darkness. Part of my story is that about 10 years ago, my wife and I lost our daughter, and it created a darkness that is unless you've lived in it, unless you've been in it, it's very, very difficult to comprehend or to describe to someone that complete lack of ability to feel like things are going to be okay, to be constantly bombarded with the thought that nothing is going to be all right, that everything is going to be wrong. And once I started getting the help that I needed and started to realise that there was a level of hope, there was a level of recovery that I could get back to some semblance of a normal life, with obviously ongoing support and starting to deal with some of the issues that had been underlining for a very long time. That's where I think I started to recover in that sense, because up until that point, I don't need any help feeling like things are hopeless. I can do that pretty well on my own. I don't need any assistance in that regard. What I need is the conversation with a treating practitioner or whoever it is to say that, there are things that we can do. There are measures we can put in place, medication, whatever, different types of treatment and care and all those sorts of things, whatever that might entail, that's going to give me that hope that things can improve or things can get to some semblance of normal, whatever that new normal is. To be able to engage with treating practitioners that say, yes, but it doesn't mean that your life is over. It doesn't mean that everything's going to be terrible from now on. That was incredibly helpful for me and for my treatment, because it gave me hope. And that's really what I needed, was hope. Understanding, being able to engage with other people who, it's that whole idea that I walked around the world with a blue nose, thinking I was the only one with a blue nose, until I walked into a room and everybody else had a blue nose. Once I started engaging with people that thought the way I did, I realised that I wasn't alone, that there was other people that felt this way, that when I went and, did some work with other lived experience people, that they said things and I thought, oh, that sounds the same. I feel the same, and I'm not alone. So that hope and support and that camaraderie that comes from that understanding has been absolutely vital for me.
I used to think that, recovery meant getting better, and that getting better meant absence of symptoms. We take this medicine or take this medical approach and it would be gone. When I sort of had come to accept that this was here to stay, and it was really just about looking at what my experience of day-to-day life was going to be, that's when the community service talked to me around their sort of recovery-oriented practice. A lot of it is around feeling safe and being supported to explore, re-identify my strengths and values, do a bit of goal setting around, exploring a new way of life. It may be a way of life that finally acknowledges the distress and the life events that have happened, rather than sort of pretending they haven't happened and hoping it goes away. But bottom line, I think it's really about finding a meaningful life again. If you can find a meaningful life that you feel you're making a contribution to, often that's, for me, that's very satisfying. And hope is a fundamental aspect of that. Without that feeling that life can and will get better, what's the point? Honestly, I need that sense of hope. So hope and meaning, I guess. The bottom line's hope and meaning.